Tonight on the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast, we delve into the fires of New Orleans, 1788 and 1794. Two massive fires that would change the landscape of New Orleans forever. We will discuss the time, surroundings, and lifestyle of the times, how it affected the town after, and the rebuilding process. Warm yourself by the verbal fire, my friends. Sit back and dwell in the darkness, mon ami. And welcome to the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. I am your host, Ryan Mckern, and it is a pleasure being with you again. Through the beds of embers and ash lies the Spanish moss of forgotten woe. Ode to Spanish colonialism times and the French architecture that once stood. In rebirth the city shall fly once more, rebuild the dreams of a crescent crown. New Orleans is no stranger to tragedy. Early in its history, two huge fires tore through the heart of the city, changing the face of the French Quarter for years to come. The Great Fires of 1788 and 1794 collectively destroyed nearly 1,000 buildings, leveling most of the city. While the buildings were rebuilt, the fire left a spooky legacy that remains to this day. Famous haunted landmarks like the St. Louis Cathedral and Muriel's Jackson Square were destroyed in the fire. But as strong as the Big Easy is, the people always bats back. The city was rebuilt, but the ghosts left behind by the fire still haunt the city streets. The Great Fire of 1788. On the sunny March afternoon, a fire sparked in the home of Don Vicente Jose Nuñez, the treasurer and paymaster of the Spanish army. Nobody knows what sparked this fire, but we know it spread pretty damn quick. A strong breeze helped push the flames through the city, aided by the mostly wooden structures that lined the streets. It took just 5 hours for the blaze to consume the city, destroying the prized homes of the city's wealthy socialites, business people, politicians, and generals. By the next morning, the blaze had destroyed 856 out of the over 101,000 standing structures in New Orleans, well over 3/4 of the city's area. The fire consumed the city's church, jail, armory, army barracks, and town hall. People died. Families lost their homes, and there was no effort to save the prisoners, who all perished. The governor, Esteban Miro, set up tents for the homeless in the aftermath of the fire. Lives could have been saved, but because it was Good Friday, the priest refused to allow the church bells to be used to alert the townsfolk. This included Pierre Antoine of the St. Louis Cathedral, which was destroyed in the fire. The public placed a lot of blame on Pierre Antoine for not ringing the church bells. Great Fire, New Orleans, 1788, Grand Incendio de Nueva Orleans, a Grand Incendio de la Nueve. The fire took place on March 21st, 1788, spanning the south-central Vieux Carré from Burgundy to Chartres Street, almost to the Mississippi River, front buildings. An additional 212 buildings were destroyed in a later citywide fire on December 8, 1794. The Good Friday fire began about 1:30 p.m. at the home of Army Treasurer Don Vicente Jose Nuñez at 619 Chartres Street, corner of Wilkinson, less than a block from the Jackson Square, Plaza de Armas. Because the fire started on Good Friday, priests refused to allow church bells to ring as a fire alarm. Within 5 hours, it consumed almost the entire city and it was fed by a strong wind from the southeast. The fire destroyed virtually all major buildings in the city, now French Quarter, including the church, municipal building, army barracks, armory, and jail. Colonel Governor Esteban Rodriguez Miro set up tents for the homeless. The fire area stretched between Dauphine Street and the Mississippi River, and between Conte Street in the south and St. Philip Street in the north. It spared the riverfront buildings, including the Customs House, the tobacco warehouses, the Governor's Building, the Royal Hospital, and the Ursulines Convent. Government officials would replace the wooden buildings and masonry structures which had courtyards, thick brick walls, arcades, and wrought iron balconies. Among the new buildings were the central New Orleans, now called Jackson Square, fixtures of St. Louis Cathedral, the Cabildo, and Presbytere. The funds and supervision of the Cathedral and the Cabildo were provided by Don Andres Alamesteri Rojas. The Cabildo burned in 1794 fire and had to be reconstructed. The Presbytere was built on a somewhat later basis, and Alamester died before it could be completed. Governor Miro had a report that summarized the suffering of the fire. He stated, "If the imagination could describe what our senses enabled us to feel from sight and touch, reason itself would recoil in horror, as it is no easy matter to say whether the sight of an entire city in flames was more horrible to behold than the suffering and pitiable condition in which everyone was involved. Mothers in search of a sanctuary or refuge for their little ones, and abandoning their earthly goods to the greed of the relentless enemy, would retire out of the way places rather than be witness to their utter ruin. Fathers and husbands were busy in saving whatever objects the rapidly spreading flames would permit them to bear off, while the general bewilderment was such as to prevent them from finding even for these a place of security. The obscurity of the night coming on through its mantle for a while over the saddening spectacle. But more horrible was still the sight, when day began to draw, of entire families pouring forth into the public highways, yielding to their lamentations and despair, who, but a few hours before, had been basking in the enjoyment of more than the ordinary comforts of life. The tears, the heartbreaking sobs, and the pallid faces of the wretched people mirrored the dire fatality that had overcome a city, now in ruins, transformed within the space of 5 hours into an arid and fearful desert. Such was the sad ending of a work of death that resulted of 70 years of industry. The report concludes. After 6 years of rebuilding on December 8th, 1794, another 212 buildings were destroyed. And that will bring us to the second portion of the podcast. The Second New Orleans Fire of 1794. On December 8th, 1794, the second of two great fires in New Orleans history occurred. Starting on Royal Street in the French Quarter, this fire was not as damaging as the first great fire in 1788, but burned down 80% of the city, but was still a major setback in rebuilding the city. In 3 short hours, the fire of 1794 burned 212 buildings, leaving many people homeless. The Spanish government offered the homeless citizens loans to rebuild, but there was a catch. And in order to receive these loans, new construction had to follow certain guidelines required by the government, which included newly developed fire codes. New building procedures included the use of non-flammable material for any building over 1 story tall. as stone was not available. This led to a widespread use of bricks and plaster, capped with tile roofs, and the buildings had to be attached to each other and bumped up against the sidewalk to create a firewall. It was at this point that the wooden cottages surrounded by gardens were instead turned into much of what is seen in the French Quarter today. On a side note, heavy restrictions still do apply to the rebuilding and building in historic neighborhoods in New Orleans to this day, including materials, zoning, locations, and height. There are a few buildings in town that were built before the fire codes were enacted. The oldest building in town and of the Mississippi River Delta is the Ursuline Convent, built in 1752. This building is the second Ursuline convent, as the first one was constructed with wood and rapidly deteriorated due to the damp Louisiana climate. The current convent was built using bricks, covered with stucco, and was designed by Louis XV style, a French variation of the king and the more elaborate Italian Baroque. The simple facade contains many arched windows, and the front door is surrounded by an arched portico. The building's beauty lies in its simplicity, which reflects the nuns who lived and worked there. The second oldest building is Lafitte's blacksmith shop, located at 941 Bourbon Street. Main characteristics of this building include briquette entrepotteau construction, which means bricks were laid between upright and diagonal posts, which can be seen peeking through the holes in the stucco, and a steep pitched slate roof pierced the dormers. The bar's website claims that the building was built between 1722 and 1732, but research by Samuel Wilson Jr. for the Library of Congress Historical American Buildings Survey project claims that perhaps the building was built by Pierre Reville in 1761. The Gabriel Pierrot House is located at 901 Burgundy Street. This building had originally been built on Bayou Road before it was purchased in 1777 by Gabriel Pierrot. In 1780, Maurice Milan was commissioned by Perrault to take the home apart and rebuild it in the city. The building has all the features of French colonial architecture, brick between post construction, a hipped roof that overhangs to create shelter from rain or sun, referred to as abat-vent, and many French doors. Madame Jean's legacy is located at 632 Domain Street, and while sources conflict about the amount of damage the building sustained in the first fire, all agree that the second fire did not damage the structure, so it does not adhere to the new fire code. The most glaring evidence of this is the use of exposed wood on the upper level, and the fact that it is detached from the adjacent houses. This house has a masonry raised basement which contains a stairwell and supports the main living space that is made up of brick between posts covered with wooden clapboards. The roof is called a hip double-pitched roof because of all four sides of the roof slope toward the ground. Like a pyramid, there are no gables. It is double-pitched because it has two levels of steepness to accommodate the gallery. It protrudes from the front facade. The gallery is held up by cypress colonnades and decorated with a plain wooden balustrade. All openings are arch-shaped, and the vertical board shutters have strap hinges. Curiously, the doors and windows on the main level are not symmetrical. While the first fire in 1788 burned down many more buildings, it is the second fire that promoted the most substantial change in the French Quarter. In his book, Fabulous New Orleans, Lyle Saxon described the new city that emerged after the fires. The city that fell before the flames was a congested French community of wooden houses, badly arranged and irregular. A stately Spanish city rose in its stead. The city, which rose from its ashes, was of brick and plaster, with arches of heavy masonry and roofs of tile. There were barred windows and long dark corridors. Large fan-shaped windows looked down into the courtyards, which held banana trees, oleanders, and parterres of flowers. Houses were built flush with the sidewalks, and balconies railed with delicate wrought iron overhung the streets. It is said by locals and visitors alike that the areas affected in these fires have a high paranormal activity. Jackson Square itself is a hotbed for ghostly activity, claiming to see many citizens of ghostly specters dressed in old attire roaming the square and the streets of the French Quarter. St. Louis Cathedral itself is reported to have seen ghostly figures within. When taking a second look, reports that people seen a figure behind them just in the peripheral to look and not see them once more. Please do check out my episode on Muriel's Jackson Square for the full accounts of the hauntings within that building and past. A haunted history episode of St. Louis Cathedral will be in the future as well. The tragedies of these two fires is recorded in history, remains some of the worst natural disasters New Orleans has endured, and the city is no stranger to horrible natural disasters. Thank you for joining me once again, my friends. Once again, I am your host, Ryan Mckern. Please like and subscribe and share videos. Leave comments of what you would like to see next covered on an episode. And check us out on Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, and where all podcasts are played. And as always, until we see each other again, au revoir.